Sometimes you just gotta get out there and play with your toys. Now, ultimately, if you've been collecting for any period of time, you're bound to run into your fair share of customs. Maybe some of these customs will make their way into your home and into your collection, but maybe they simply are just nice to look at and you leave them behind. Quite often, they're used to fill collection gaps when a toy line doesn't get around to making a certain figure. Other times, they're simply an intuitive add-on into a collection as a natural fit with no in-story canon, but just happens to resonate with the collector. Still, some are used as a bit of a gag or an inside joke that's just special to the particular person that they belong to. During the many years before the Toy Connections channel existed, and also in the time after this channel launched its first video in the spring of 2021, a lot of custom figures have made their way into this collection. Anyway, it's time to have a look at the top 10 custom figures that have made their way into the Toy Connections toy collection. Let's begin. We'll keep the discussion limited to items that were either one-offs or done in such a limited run where the bulk of the work was either hand-painted or customized using existing parts. Thus, we won't be discussing factory runs like the G.I. Joe stylized figures done by Red Laser's Army or Black Major, nor will we be covering third-party Transformers figures that were done in semi-large runs. Because this is a personalized collection, you'll see that G.I. Joe will be repeated a few times here, as my collection has skewed heavily towards Joes, particularly in recent years. This is a top 10 list that's sorted in terms of sentimental value, largely because of the individualized story associated with acquiring each of these items. But in any case, there's no need to hold the discussion back any further. So let's get to our list. Starting us off at number 10 is the Shark from Mask. A key item that was never released by Kenner in the 1980s, this was a toy that I picked up at Fan Expo Vancouver back in 2017 from a seller that I knew. The reason that it doesn't rank any higher is that it's really more of a parts-forming toy that switches from its standard base car mode into its more stylized attack mode, rather than having the spring action to immediately change between modes like the vintage Mask toys that it's supposed to fit with. The base body is that of a Playmobil car that doesn't quite look enough like the Shark vehicle in the Mask cartoon, and it's just a little bit out of proportion scale-wise compared to the other Mask vehicles that I'd want to display it with. Then again, back when I got it, it was a decent enough placeholder and stand-in, but ultimately, the plan is to replace it with the Ramen Toy Great White vehicle that will fit more nicely with the collection. One slightly disappointing thing was that, while this was an impulse buy, the toy didn't come with Gloria Baker like it shows on the custom box, so I did have to source a separate custom that was clearly made from a Vanessa Warfield figure. The custom box is also of a lower resolution, so what I'm trying to say is that while the overall offering was okay for the time, collecting standards have evolved where expectations are now much higher. The experience of getting this as an on-the-spot, in-the-moment purchase at an expo was nice, and at the time I was excited just to fill the character and vehicle gap. Overall, it's a decent stand-in, but strictly speaking, we can do better now. For number 9 is the Evil Decepticon Jetfire. This is the only custom on the list that I had painted on my own back in 2009. The story is that I used to see some figures like this floating around on eBay in the early 2000s with this color scheme as an artist's imagination of what the toy of Jetfire could have looked like if he was released as a Decepticon. Keep in mind that he actually did begin as a Decepticon in the 1984 Sunbow animated cartoon series before becoming an Autobot. As many of you know, with the history of this toy being from a Macross mold of their Valkyrie figure, the toy was never gonna look like the Transformers animation model due to likeness rights. So this purple and white rendition makes sense as a parallel to the red and white version that was released as an Autobot. I had applied a layer of silver spray paint as a primer coat before topping it up with 2 coats of purple spray paint, and then used hand paint for the eyes and other areas that didn't make sense to spray paint. The base figure is actually the early 2000s Bandai reissue of the VF1S Super Valkyrie, which of course is a reissue of the original Takatoku figure of the 1980s. You'll notice a difference from the Hasbro Jetfire in that the nose cone where the cockpit is a bit sharper compared to the rounder design of the 1985 Hasbro Jetfire. Aside from kit bashing or simply buying a ready-made accessory kit, I don't do a lot of customization these days, so this is a nice story to share. It was a different time in my collecting life back then, so this figure is special to me for that reason, even if I look back and think I could have done a slightly better job in my own painting details. For number 8 is the LJN stylized custom figure of the Barbarian. Now, in the WWF during the late 1980s, the Barbarian would form a tag team with his partner the Warlord, and collectively they were known as the Powers of Pain. They'd be managed for part of this run by Mr. Fuji, and now, while LJN figures of Mr. Fuji and the Warlord do exist, the line of 8-inch scale wrestling superstars was discontinued in 1989, leaving some tag teams unfinished with only one figure of the team released. Such was the case for Demolition's Axe as well as the Warlord. And in fact, the Warlord came as part of the final series of wrestling superstars that was released by Grand Toys when LJN was defunct. This resin cast figure that's painted up of the Barbarian matches his late 1980s look, and my personal story was that I saw the listing online for a pair of custom figures of both members of the Powers of Pain. As I already had the original Warlord, I asked if the listing could be split up so that I could purchase the Barbarian on his own, and the seller was more than happy to do so. The only minor issue I see with this is that because this is a custom figure that's been painted, it doesn't have the natural rubberized sheen of the other figures, so he has more of a matte finish. In addition, the resin material is of a harder plastic than the rubber used for the older vintage figures, but that's okay as it does allow me to complete the tag team in my collection. At number 7 is the Mandalorian-themed Battle Android Trooper. There will be a few G.I. Joe entries on this list, but this figure can double as both a G.I. Joe as well as a Star Wars entry, and it scales just fine with either of the 3 3/4 inch lines. This custom is styled after the armor that Din Djarin wore in Season 1 of The Mandalorian before the days of his more refined silver Beskar armor that he'd wear later on. This item was painted up by my friend Peter at Sparkplug Customs, who'll have a few entries on this list. He used Citadel paint, and that's the paint that's often associated with Warhammer figures. The way Peter has applied the paint intentionally gives it a less refined look by comparison to the shinier silver Beskar armor, so it harkens back to the early days of Din Djarin's missions on the Disney Plus series. It looks great next to the 6-inch Star Wars Black Series figure, and Peter has given it the jump style G.I. Joe jetpack to give it the right feel that we're going for in terms of a G.I. Joe and Star Wars crossover. This one's special to me since it was done by a friend who I often hang out with at the nearby toy shows in my area. At number 6 is the Transformers Blue Streak. The story surrounding this color scheme goes all the way back to the beginning of the Transformers line itself. Now, while Blue Streak's figure and his animation model were not actually blue, the promotional material shown in the 1984 catalog does show a blue version of him, as does his box art and the artwork on his instruction manual. The reason for this is that there was a Diaclone blue Datsun car that predated the Transformers, and Diaclone of course being where the first G1 Transformers cars and jets adopted their tooling from, with Blue Streak actually being a silver color upon his G1 Transformers release, and with the blue word in his name Blue Streak. All of this has made the Blue Streak Diaclone toy something of a holy grail amongst collectors. As such, a lot of people want it, and it's always quite expensive to obtain. I saw this custom blue version on a local message board listing back in 2007, and it was a seller that I had known and had done several deals with, so it's a great stand-in lieu of the original. I would honestly not play or fiddle much with the original figure, so this is a great item just to transform and have on the shelf. The blue color doesn't quite fully match the Diaclone original version, but it does the job well enough as a stand-in. For number 5 is Sparkplug, as in Spike's dad, who was featured in the first 2 seasons of the G1 Transformers animated cartoon by Sunbow. This was made from a G.I. Joe toll booth figure, and the hammer accessory, it's a little bit beat up, but it makes sense for him to hold an accessory of some sort anyway, since Sparkplug was featured as a mechanic in the cartoon. This was another that was painted up by Peter at Sparkplug Customs, and is actually the item for which he named his Instagram account after. Like the Mandalorian custom, this Sparkplug figure can actually double as both a Transformers figure as well as a G.I. Joe figure. In all honesty, in many ways it's the perfect Transformers G.I. Joe crossover item. For number 4 is the G.I. Joe Classified custom version of the fridge. Now, I know that the actual upgrade gear comes from a ready-made kit by Gridiron Studios, but I did ask Peter yet again to do some painting work on the figure body just to make it look more like the vintage toy of William the Refrigerator Perry from 1987. Thus, this item is more than just a simple kit bash or a straight-up accessories upgrade. The base figure is from a G.I. Joe Classified Cobra Island Roadblock body with a head sculpt from a previous version of Classified Roadblock. This is special as the fridge doesn't generally license out his likeness, so getting this into the collection definitely fills the character gap of a real-life personality turned G.I. Joe. And just a small hint, there might be another real-life personality turned G.I. Joe closer to the top of this list. And before we get to the top 3, let's have a look at a few honorable mentions that just fell short of making the cut. There's enough honorable mentions that the main list could have been a top 15 or top 20, but let's go on and start with this G.I. Joe Classified Desert Trooper that my good friend Dreadnought Ryan from the Island of Misfit Toy Collectors gifted to me. He painted up a G.I. Joe Classified Flint figure as the base, and then I added a Gridiron Studios Desert loadout. Ryan also added a diorama to this set, which looks simply amazing. Another is this G.I. Joe Classified Custom Jinx figure that my good friend at Payne's Toy Samples gifted me, which I have as a stand-in since it was done before the announcement of the G.I. Joe Classified Jinx figure itself. I've also got this Once-A-Man Cobra Commander from Matthew LaCroix, who's a well-known high-end G.I. Joe customizer. Truthfully, this is a better figure than many others on the main top 10 list, but it becomes an honorable mention because I didn't have much of a story to go with it. It was simply a purchase that I saw and decided to buy at first opportunity. I do want to add though that I never liked the actual concept of a half-snake Cobra Commander, even if this figure is done superbly. The reason I'm not a fan of the concept is because it's always been a pet peeve of mine that in my other favorite toy line, which is the Transformers, is that the main villain Megatron got upgraded into Galvatron during the events of the 1986 Transformers movie. But in Cobra Commander's case, he got turned into a snake in the G.I. Joe 1987 animated film, so I wasn't a fan of that. But that being said, it's hard to pass up an opportunity to buy any amazing work done by Matthew LaCroix, so thus this figure is proudly in my collection. And for another honorable mention, well, let's talk about this championship belt right over here. If you've seen this channel in the past, you've probably seen me talk about it before. The classic Intercontinental title is always special in WWE history, and while I was told that this is a custom belt, I don't know the actual history of how it came to be. You can tell that it is a custom piece of some sort because when you look closely, it's not sewn together perfectly, and there are some parts of the fabric that were done haphazardly. One cool thing though is that the belt came with a stand, which I don't often show nor talk about, but it's there. I've also heard that some knockoff replica belts were made in Pakistan, so this could have been from there. All I know is that I was told at the time of the purchase that this was a custom belt in of itself. That, and I don't actually ever recall seeing a more modern post-WWE Network era logo on a classic IC title with the black strap, though we have seen it on a white strap, so this belt is a bit of an anomaly, though someone can correct me if I'm wrong and they've actually seen the Network logo on a black strap. But the cool story is that I bought it from a seller that I knew at the flea market, and people kept making comments as I walked out the door and towards my car, as it's a title belt that everyone's familiar with. If you followed this channel for any length of time, you've probably seen me wear it on live streams and podcasts before, often in something of a satirical manner.
That's something I would expect NECA to take on, being that they're so into like the indie stuff. But
is that the IC belt?
Oh yeah, hold that belt high for that, Ken. Oh my god. Damn. Ken has a seat at the table. He keeps the belts.
I've also got this trio of G.I. Joe Renegades figures for Mercer, Taurus, and Red Dog painted up as members of Slaughter's Marauders, for which they're a natural fit due to their association with the Sarge, and they look great with the other members of the Marauders sub-faction. I also have this custom of the G.I. Joe communications officer named Sparks, who appeared in a few episodes of the Sunbow animated cartoon and some issues of the Devil's Due Publishing comics. This was a walk-by impulse purchase at a local toy show and was kit-bashed and modded from various 80s and 90s Joes. And we can make our way into the top 3 with a figure that's been right behind me this whole time. So, How about let's talk about Kendar, the Mercenary of Eternia. It's a figure that was gifted to me by Adam from the Go Figure YouTube channel as part of a Secret Santa activity that we did back in December of 2022.
Secret
It's
Santa.
a secret, yeah. Somebody wrapped a present and sent it to you, Adam. I don't know.
Wait a second. Holy. I am floored. I gotta full screen this.
What? It's Kendar.
Yes!
Really?
Nice.
That's awesome.
Is that roll?
I knew it.
Mini roll hand.
And not only that, look what he did on the back.
Oh, that is awesome. That is awesome.
That's so cool.
You could hear just how ecstatic I was to get the item, and Adam did a fair bit of customization, which was done up using a vintage Masters of the Universe Jitsu body and armor for the base, and he 3D printed some accessories for it, including the selfie sword that seems to have a tablet attached to it. And he's got my favorite Muppet Ralph as a hand puppet to go on missions with Kendar. I guess he's supposed to look like me, and the story goes that my friends gave me the name of Kendar as a MOTU alias. In any case, it's become one of my favorite items in the collection. In the number 2 spot is the Mountie Sergeant Slaughter. This is a significant piece in my overall collection due to the backstory surrounding it. It was a pandemic era project that I did with some friends as a Canadian toy Facebook group exclusive. I went and sourced out 40 Sergeant Slaughter figures and had Peter at Sparkplug Customs paint them up. I then asked my friend Mark to do up some accessories while our other friend Ian did up the card backs. This one's extremely special as I basically coordinated the entire project together as a fun thank you to those on social media closest to me. Yes, in the end it's a repaint with some custom accessories and card back work, but it's got an extra layer of importance due to it being a Canadian theme, as well as me and my friends who worked on it all being Canadian ourselves. I get that it's not as complex as some other items on this list, but the memory behind it will always be what makes it noteworthy. And now, with all of that said, it's time for the top entry on this list. So coming in at number 1 is Owen Hart. Here's a figure that's done up in a style that I'll never expect to find in an officially licensed capacity, not now and not in the future. I bought the figure on eBay and it came only with its sunglasses. The story is that I then bought a custom jacket off of a friend, then used 2 Slammy Awards from a basic Sergeant Slaughter figure, and then added a Mattel Intercontinental Championship belt. All of this gives Owen that mid to late 1990s look, both when he was a heel and facing off with Big Brother Brett during the events of 1994, right through him reuniting with other Hart family members and associates when they formed the Hart Foundation stable in 1997. The reason this is special is, with the tragic circumstances surrounding Owen's death in 1999 and his family's contentious relationship with the WWE, a figure with the Hart Foundation attire and likeness will probably never get made. I'd scoured the internet quite heavily before finding this figure, and as mentioned, I took the extra effort to add his Slammy Awards, IC title, and custom jacket. It looks good posed with other members of the Hart Foundation, and I'm not sure which figure was used for the base figure for the repaint work, so if someone knows, they can tell me in the comments below. Yes, I do realize that Jazzwares made a figure of Owen and that his family does have a relationship with AEW in order to do such a release. And while that will always be a fitting tribute and a good item for collectors, I also wanted to have one in this particular appearance to round out my collection. And as big of a fan of wrestling as I am, and as much as I adore that era of wrestling where the Hart Foundation formed a Canadian alliance in an anti-American angle all the way back in 1997, this figure had to be at the top of my list for custom figures that I owned. Anyway, that's the top 10 list. Do tell me in the comments section below which one you think is the best figure that I talked about here, be it whether it was in the main top 10 or as an honorable mention. And if you happen to like this video, don't go anywhere just yet. I'm gonna put another Toy Connections top 10 countdown list that you can click on right over here, or for a look at some toy histories, you can click on this playlist right over here. Otherwise, I'll see you all next time. Thanks for watching, and take care.